So hello everyone and welcome. You're joining us today at CG Spectrum for a webinar looking at how to sell assets on the Unreal Marketplace. My name is Zoe Robertson. I'm the digital media producer at CG Spectrum, and I'll be moderating today's webinar and working behind the scenes to help out with answering any questions that you have. So we do have a chat box, but we also have a Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen here. So be sure to put any questions you have into the Q&A box. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the presentation. And we do have a section for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but feel free to put your questions in at any time throughout as they come up or as you think of them. And we'll try to answer a few throughout, and then whatever we don't get to, we'll answer at the end of the presentation. And in the chat box, I'll also be sharing any important links or information that comes up during the presentation. So before we launch in, I'll tell you a little bit about CG Spectrum. Justin, if you can hit the slide. So we are an entirely online animation, VFX, digital art, and game design school, helping students pursue successful careers in film and games. We're a rookies certified school, and we offer the most up-to-date, specialized job-focused training, placing our graduates in demand on the job market. Our curriculum is taught by industry mentors like our host and guest today, who have years of experience and have worked on blockbuster films and games. And we have a range of opportunities from beginner courses all the way to advanced diplomas. Our classes are offered in small online groups with a maximum of 4 students, or you have the option to do one-on-one mentorship privately. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our modeling courses at the end of the webinar, but first I'll introduce your host and the rest of our crew here. So Justin is hosting our webinar today. He has over 18 years of experience in the video game industry and has helped bring dozens of game titles to life while at studios like Disney Interactive, Epic Games, Robomondo, Midway Games, and Phosphor Studios, and has work appearing in legacy franchises like Tony Hawk, Kingdom Hearts, and Mortal Kombat, among others. Justin's also the acting creative director for The Rookies, which is the industry standard for animation, visual effects, and the gaming industries. He's also a game development producer and author at Epic Games. And last but not least, he's a foundations mentor at CG Spectrum and has been helping to put together a brand new real-time course at CG Spectrum starting later this year. And I will definitely put a link to that in our chat box a little bit later. We're also very lucky to be joined by our 2 guests today. The first is Clinton Crumpler. Hi, Clinton.
How's it going?
Clinton is the studio head, owner, and creative director of Dekogon Studios. Previously, he was an artist at Microsoft Studios, The Coalition, Bethesda's Battlecry Studios, Kixeye, Army Game Studio, Midwinter Entertainment, and various other independent studios. Clinton's primary focus is environment art, shader development, and art direction. His credits include Gears of War 4 and 5, Scavengers, and a textbook with a focus on game art development for Unreal Engine. And finally, we're very happy to have Carl Shedd joining us today as well. Carl has worked in the industry for over 17 years. He's currently a world building director at Gearbox Software, which is where he started his career as a level designer for the Brothers in Arms franchise. Later, he was part of the team that was integral to evolving the Borderlands art style into what it has become today. And Carl has also worked at Gearbox to create and lead their level art and lighting art departments. His game credits include Brothers in Arms, the Borderlands franchise, and Rage. So you guys are in very good hands today to learn all about tapping into the Unreal Assets Marketplace. And with that, I will hand over to our host, Justin, and our 2 guests, Clinton and Carl.
Cool. Thank you guys for coming up, or showing up. This is something that we've kind of loosely been talking about for a couple months now. I've known Carl and Clinton for a little while now and have worked with both of them. And at first, before I even started talking to Clinton, I was always aware of his Dekogon studio, and just if anyone's ever gone on Unreal Marketplace, you'll see Dekogon assets. And it's not just the amount of Dekogon assets on there, it's the quality of it. So I thought it'd be fun just to kind of like talk about not only what it means to sell on the Unreal Marketplace, but also to create and everything that was wrapped around it. And then bringing someone like Carl, who just does amazing jaw-dropping art and actually utilizes some of Dekogon's assets along the way, just because, the working and friendship between him and Clinton. So high-level stuff to talk about Unreal Asset Marketplace. It did start in 2014, and it's been constantly evolving. And it's got around 3,000 plus sellers now and over 10,000 plus products. So what we're going to kind of talk about high level is going to be like why we should be creating assets and the types of content, either environments, props, etc., that you can kind of focus on. So let's kind of like kick it off by just Clinton, what, when exactly, I guess, like if we launched in 2014, when did you start doing assets for Unreal?
It wasn't too far after. I think it was maybe 2015 I listed my first asset, and that was an office scene I had done previously. And that was just something to kind of just to test the waters, just to see how it was. I realized, I think I was talking to a friend, and then we were talking about how like oftentimes as artists, when we're creating content, even just to get in the industry or like, to, uh, I guess like get better at our skill set, we often will like make a scene or like make a few assets, and it'll just sit on a hard drive somewhere and just like kind of decay into nothing. And so when I saw the marketplace kind of come up, I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing, like that might be cool to like actually like list a scene that I had worked on for some time there. And that was kind of how I got started from that.
Very cool. And when would you say, Carl, when was like the first time that you actually started noticing the marketplace and actually using any of the content from there for your stuff?
It was around the fall of 2016.
That's a very specific date. I remember
September 12th.
Sounds pretty specific. I remember it because there was a long Christmas break, right? And I had that itch to build some things, and when you have a 2 or 3 week gap, if you're trying to create every asset, for a scene, you could get bogged down pretty quickly, and you would end your break or your refresher with not much to show for it. Could be kind of demoralizing. And I remember friends that I had worked with had put a couple assets on the marketplace, and I started kind of nosing around it and saying, hey, I think I could actually make something with this stuff on here. And at this point, it was just for fun. It was a break away from the day-to-day life. So yeah, I remember that specifically because I remember having a long vacation where I said, hey, I can pull together some of these assets and put together a scene pretty quick and have something to show for my time off.
Very cool. So I guess after you did that first scene, Clinton, like what made you think that you should be creating these assets? Like, was like, did you kind of see a response right away, or are you like, oh man, like was it like I guess what made you want to create the assets after that initial?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say like multiple things. So like I guess like first off was obviously like it was a good amount of income that was coming in from it because the asset was selling quite well. I think when the marketplace essentially took off when it first started, especially the visibility of pretty much anyone on there, because there's a limited amount of people, was much higher. And so I think, it's still a possibility to have that. It's just a matter of like having really good quality content at this point. But when I first started, it was only like a couple hundred folks that were listing on there. So like that was really helpful to get views on the actual scenes we were selling. And then from there, I think too, it not only helped with like just like sales in general, but also like notoriety. Like I got like more freelance gigs from that because people would be like, oh yeah, I bought your scene on the marketplace. Like, can I hire you directly to do this work? And I was like, oh, this is great. This is another outlet to kind of essentially like, it's another like career outlet without having to actually do like the work to be like, oh, like it's almost like an art test without actually doing an art test for everyone that could be potentially interested in you as an artist. So people would be looking at that and be like, oh, I like how well your scene was put together. Can you like make another for us in this way? And so that led to like quite a few freelance contracts after that. And so I think that's kind of spurred me on to be like, oh, hey, like talking to friends and be like, oh, we can like sell these scenes together and like continue to like, and to increase that revenue for all of us and like, continue to increase that pool of assets that we're building in that scene.
Is that more or less when Dekogon became like like not just an idea, but a reality?
Definitely, yeah. So I was working at Microsoft at the time, and I had a long conversation with a good friend, Kurt, and we were talking about how like there was a lot of people that were applying to work at Microsoft and other studios that I'd worked at in the past that were international, and they were like, oh, it's really hard to get them a work visa, and they're really hard to get them to travel overseas, or it's really hard to get them their first job, especially even if they're good artists. It's just the first hurdle to get into the industry is so tough for a lot of artists, even if they are really good. And so the marketplace was kind of like a perfect starting point for a lot of those folks where it's like, oh, I'm a really great artist and I know how to do the the actual content. I know how to produce content that's game ready. It's just I don't have like my first into the industry, or I'm not like full-time at a big studio yet. And so this is a good way for them not only to kind of get their foot in the door, to show the quality of their art and the content they're able to make, but it also just kind of like gave them revenue as well. So I was like, what if we like collectively started working on scenes together? Because then it's like, I'm not spending like 3 or 4 months working on a scene. I'm spending like 1 or 2 months working with a bunch of friends and then making content together.
That's an interesting point that you said, that it's not even from the financial aspect. It really did lead to more work because if they just saw the quality of not only what you made, but how you put together. And I guess another question would be for Carl would be, upon seeing like some of these scenes that you would get on the Unreal Marketplace, were you ever like did you ever click on like a seller and be like, this is an amazing thing, and then try to see what else they made, and then actually go down the rabbit hole of like, who are you? Where do you work from? Oh, maybe I have an open position. You ever do that? I've done that. I mean, Wikipedia and all that stuff, but I've even done it with some of the stuff that I find that like is good content on the Unreal Marketplace. I'm like, that's great stuff. Let's see what else this person has made.
Yeah, we actually have done that, and some for selfish reasons, getting familiar with work and understanding with Dekogon the quality of their content. Obviously, I knew I was safe in their hands purchasing, but that led to ultimately working with Clinton as well, using their content and scenes that I had built. Me knowing very well who he was, him reaching out to me and doing some work with them. But we have actually at Gearbox, there have been times where we've found someone with a specific set of skills, and we said, why don't we reach out to this guy? We've been looking for a position for someone to do exactly what this individual has done. Let's reach out and talk to them. And sometimes I think we actually may have an individual or two that we have in studio that we reached out to that way. But it's wonderful. I mean, it definitely creates a name for people.
It's interesting that you said that too. Yeah, that wasn't something I was actually expecting to talk about on this. And it's a nice little pivot, because a lot of times I do get questions from students just through the rookies or through people I'm actually mentoring, or just in general, who are trying to apply to different studios I've worked at. And they're like, here's my work. I don't know how to get it noticed. And my go-to thing is, make sure you're researching the actual studio, make sure your work is up to par, make sure you're like, obviously like these days, sometimes people can kind of leverage like 80 level or ArtStation or rookies for their blogs, but being able to actually submit content to the marketplace, have it approved, and have people be able to download it and buy it, and look at it, that's huge, because it's like an art test that anyone can kind of grab and be like, wow, this person's work is amazing. Kind of like what Clinton did. It just leads to more brand recognition. And I guess one more question before I move on from this. Is that how you guys got to know each other? Just from his asset packs?
Yeah.
Look at that. And then friendships can be made. Unreal Marketplace.
Yeah,
creating friends.
Yeah. And, I will say for people that don't know, I mean, a lot of times in the studio, I know our level art team and our lighting team, we tried to build a culture. Like I'm big on personal projects. I like for people to, when you're working at a studio, a lot of times a project can be an extended amount of time. It could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 7 years. And sometimes it's a very specific theme, style, and all of us have different tastes and passions, right? And so I've worked on Borderlands for 12 years and I love it. But I want to do some nitty gritty, dirty, scary looking stuff that doesn't really necessarily fit within that. And I think that, the industry, Justin, you mentioned a little bit earlier, but the industry can pass you by. Sometimes you'll be on a project for 5 years using that project's tech. It's kind of like that planet in Interstellar where time is different.
Yeah.
So being on a personal project allows you to kind of keep up with the state of the art. But our teams within that, a lot of us are doing personal projects for fun. So whenever someone puts up a really stellar marketplace pack, a lot of times the team will kind of share like, hey dude, look at this new pack that just dropped. This is great stuff. And so, people in the industry who are doing these personal projects using Unreal will notice, because whenever something stellar comes around, a lot of times they'll pass it around. The lighting artists specifically are like, ooh, this would be a fun project to dig in and relight. And level artists are always trying to collect that backlog of like assets to build their library. So that's a whole angle that people may not realize as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's how me and you got connected to Clinton, because just our shared of like, hey man, we want to create something that we'd like inside. So I guess a good question to kind of pop in after that would be like the types of content that you guys see as being relevant. And you mentioned something about environments and being able to download them and pop them in to possibly light them, or like what I mean, it seems like the times I've gone through there, obviously you can do so many things with the marketplace in terms of like people can sell rigs, visual effects, scripts. But I feel like obviously a lot of the ones that we have here and the highlight what you guys have is environments and props are really kind of the go-to, right?
Yeah, I would say those are probably, I mean, definitely like the high notes, right? Because you want to think about like, I mean, like games have a sort of cycle to them as to like what people are interested in at the time, right? So it's like, for a while there, it's like every game was like post-apocalyptic in the snow. And then now it's like, like everything kind of goes in cycles. So it's like, you'll find that those games need a massive amount of content to make them. And oftentimes a lot of indie developers will pull from those marketplace assets nowadays too. So having, a wider selection of assets that you're creating that have a more open availability to what kind of game it could find itself in is definitely what you want to aim for, comparatively to like, oh, I made this very specific sci-fi sniper gun that is only usable in this way. It's like, that's cool. And it might be a great portfolio piece, but you might have a bit more trouble like selling something like that on the marketplace just because it's so specific relative to like what other people might be looking for when they're looking on the marketplace for something for their particular title or game.
So let's move to the next slide and actually kind of talk about like we've already kind of started digging into this, like how pros use the assets and what they're looking for, what industries does the marketplace serve, and can assets be changed or modified. So just from the flip side of Clinton, not what you're creating, but like Carl, you mentioned that you guys already use some of this content over at Gearbox. So what do you like when you guys are at the stage of like what makes you say either we hire someone to make this, we hire an outsourced team to make this, or we just go to the Unreal marketplace? Like, is there like an order? Like, what's the go-to for that?
It's contextual. A lot of times when we're in prototyping phase right now, it can also be super useful. Not even just for final use. If we've had times where we're working on something where it's like, man, we've got a group of guys that are working on, I'm trying to be very secretive here about this, but if we have people that are working on a feature and we know it could take 5 to 6 months to get where we need to be, the marketplace can be useful to help engineers get a feel for what they're creating without waiting for that art pipeline to catch up.
That makes sense. Yeah, because it's like they can be, for those of you who don't know, like when you're working in early stages of game development, there is kind of like these 3 tracks that usually kick up, and it's like design messing with something, programming and systems kind of working on the back line, and then art's kind of figuring out over here trying to figure out the art style. So there could be a nice way to just have content that engineering and design has just to kind of like mess around stuff that loosely is of the same subject matter. So that's really cool to do. Plus, I'd imagine that like it's more cost effective to grab some things off of the actual marketplace than to hire and deal with an outsource or even bring up a new person too. Not to say that both of them aren't viable options, but maybe early on in development, it's much easier just to be like, all right, cool, I'm going to grab what I want just to get this prototype idea out. Then we'll ramp up to these other stages.
That's exactly right.
I'm so smart. Just kidding. So I know, what we obviously we're all in the game industry, but we I feel like all of us have actually kind of put our toe into some other industry other than games several times. And Clinton, you personally, like, has this led to more work outside of the game industry? Like, have you?
Oh yeah.
Like, can you give us some examples?
Definitely, yeah. So like we've gotten quite a few really bizarre contracts, and we found our work in a kind of a lot of weird spaces. Like we've seen our work in like anime films, we've seen our work in like literal real films. We've seen our work in like VR sims. Our work being in the marketplace has led us to contracts with like healthcare and like all sorts of stuff with like medical professions, where we made like a hospital pack, and then those people bought that pack, and then they're like, oh, can we commission you to build a bunch of stuff for like our like we did a bunch of like PPE training sims for like the COVID preparation stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, I was on that one.
Yeah, so it's really bizarre what we get. Like I think we've even done contracts with like, say for instance, like Fox Sports and like Fox News, where we like made like the White House for like the background of the inauguration that they had for like the actual like broadcasts. We have like made like race car tracks for like NASCAR. It's pretty bizarre, like really what you get into when you start to like kind of delve down that hole, because it's like the more you realize like Unreal as a tool has so many uses for the actual content you're producing, you'll realize there's a lot more people actually pulling from that pool than you kind of realized up front.
Yeah, especially since like, where like I started working in games when it was like PlayStation 1, and now that we're in PlayStation 5 era, it's like the line of visual quality between any game content and actual like virtual production and stuff you see in animation is like blurred, which is why you see so many virtual production, animation, visual effects studios actually using Unreal in their development pipeline. So I guess another question too would be, when you create your content, do you make it so it could be changed or modified? And then Carl, like, do you ever, when you're working with content that you grab from there, are you changing and modifying? And do you find it's like easy to kind of adapt from that? Or are you just throwing it in there as is?
Modifying occasionally, it depends on the assets. Materials are more likely, but in that case, it's usually very, very fine tuned when you need, I don't know, hue shifts or value adjustments or things like that. Models, for the most part, in very rare cases, maybe I've exported it into Substance and like ran a grime layer or something that I needed to do to weather it to fit it into the scene a little bit more. For the most part, though, I'm inspired more to create based on what I'm seeing come from the marketplace, which is really cool. One of those like really nice packs will come along and I'll say, hey, I've had this idea. Because this exists now, I see a path now to create this. Because again, this is all like spare time. It's like, how do I do the most I can with the free time I have? So a lot of times it's inspired by what exists in front of me, so it doesn't require a whole lot of modification. Yeah.
And then Clinton, are you, since your initial content creation and like, I feel like the last thing I remember you creating, I think it was that exterior mansion scene, and before that, the actual gym, and we had a science room. Like, did you create things in mind that, like, with the most current ones that allow this kind of adaptability and modification?
Yeah, for sure. So like, whenever we're making, like, I think when they initially kind of created stuff, it was mostly a kind of a menagerie of like props that would mostly be found themselves in like common games. And then as we've kind of grown, we've kind of pushed more into like full environments, and those environments and most of the materials that we set up for those, we make it so it's kind of like really flexible as to like tinting or having like layer mask, or like, creating landscapes that could be easily editable. And then, yeah, like with the mansion and the basketball gym, all those are like modularly constructed. So like, say for instance, if you're like, I bought the mansion pack, and you're like, oh, I want to make a completely different mansion. So we've made it so like, basically it's really flexible to someone just kind of reach in there, grab that, and like make something completely different just based off the content we've pre-established.
Very cool. I love that. All right, let's go to the next one. So I kind of want to pull this up real quick. I don't know if actually, yeah, so I already have it up. So those of you, just to get familiar, this is Unreal's marketplace. And if you do go and you search Dekogon Studios on there, you'll see an option of like, just for the first part, look at the quality. Actually, it's just one person getting a review, but you're doing great.
There's always that one person.
Yeah. there's like, the amount of content you have, 1 of 20 and 187 results. So if I'm reading this right, you've done 187 content packs.
Yeah. So we're almost to 200, almost there.
In 5 years. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
something like that. It's very cool to see this kind of stuff too. Like, I'm gonna click on one just to kind of look through it. And the beautiful thing I do like, and I kind of feel like I skate around like what Carl does too late at night when I'm like trying to work on something, and you just can literally click through and be like, oh, cool, this is what someone's working on. It's being able to present something right away with a nice beauty render, and then showing off different site like assets, views of it. And then like, one thing I've been always a fan of what you do with your presentation is you do this nice breakdown of the actual content. And like you just mentioned with the mansion, it's very much pieced content that you can kind of go back, and someone could literally take what you have created and recreate something in their own view, which I think is great. You do a really good job of kind of breaking down description details, and like obviously like there's these other things that we kind of like have. So and I think we could probably dig into that a little bit more in the next session, just this very, very specifics, because I want to keep this high level, but I just wanted to pop by and just show you guys just an example of deco content. So when we go back on this one, here's some more. I'm just gonna like kind of cycle through. So Clinton, as I'm cycling through this one, we'll just look at we have some three examples of some content. So the first one was the retro 80s combo pack, and you mentioned a good way to make Unreal Marketplace content is to kind of find that like kind of like good focus that does have a lot of usability, not something super hyper focused like a fancy gun, but I feel like you guys have really hit that one sweet spot and making asset packs that people can actually use. So what kind of research, I guess, goes into that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's 2 parts, right? Like, I mean, I think it's good to observe the actual marketplace itself, to be like, oh, where are the holes? Like, what assets are missing? Like, what are people not making, but you think are a really useful thing for, game development? And then the other thing is like, what's in fashion, what's in trend? Like, what kind of games are people making? Like, are people making survival horror games, or people making RTS games? Are people making like, military sims? Like what kind of games are the games that you're seeing a lot come out on Steam, on different Epic Games platform? Like what kind of games are you seeing? And that's going to give you an idea as to what kind of content is going to just do well for you, not only like financially, but also just like give you good feedback, give you good visibility, and like, promote your sales more overall. But yeah, I think in general, like with most of these sets too, we kind of broke it down so it's digestible. So like, say like when, kind of Carl was talking, like if he's looking through, he doesn't want to have to buy like a $300 pack just to get like a trumpet. Like he's going to be like, that's a lot to pay for that trumpet. So it's like, we broke it down so it's a lot easier. So it's like, it's digestible chunks. So it's like each set will have a theme, and then each of those themes will have like maybe 4 to 5 sets in that kind of pack that you can be like, oh, I just want the chairs or like the tables kind of pack, and I'll use that in my set or whatnot. So it makes it a little bit easier for even just like an entry level person. And I've known tons of people that have like bought our packs, and then they're like Carl was saying, they're a lighter and they just want to like show off their lighting skills, and they'll make a scene just from that. And it costs them like $100 to buy like 4 packs. And it's like, now they have a whole scene that they've made, and it looks very professional as to how they present it for their portfolio.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good point too. I think a lot of times students often think that they have to make the whole, like if you're someone who wants to be just a lighting artist, like buy these assets, go on Unreal's marketplace and even grab the free maps that they have for the month or just constantly free, and obviously credit them, but just do lighting scenarios with that. Don't spend all your time doing something else that's going to keep you from polishing and becoming better at that one skill. So I do have a question too. I noticed you kind of have like is there like a set number of content that you do create when you do your asset packs? Is it like, hey, we want to stick between 10 and 12, or?
Yeah, I would say like anywhere between, I would say like 10 to 20 per pack, we kind of range it. And then we kind of range it on complexity too, right? So like there's a lot of different artists working on this. So we try to keep it fair as to like how much work each artist is putting into the individual packs. So we kind of keep the complexity per asset relatively close, so that when we combine the packs, like it makes sense as to like, oh, this is a cohesive pack. I'm paying this much for 20 chairs, or I'm paying this much for, 10 really complex assets. So it makes it as a fair trade-off for the buyer as well too.
Very cool. So next thing is, and I kind of wanted to like kind of focus back onto Carl. We want a couple of things. We want to talk about how the scenes are constructed, how it impacts the final user, what to keep in mind when creating assets, and imagining what someone else in the pipeline will actually want to pick up and use. So first two, let's really kind of, I'm going to kind of like take it to Carl. And Carl, actually, if you want to, I'm going to stop sharing and you want to share your screen. Carl actually has a couple of examples, and this is why I wanted to have Carl on the board as well. It's because he makes these amazing scenes after working all day at Gearbox, and he's got a family. I'm just like, holy shit, how do you do this? Yeah, so I don't know. Let's go pop up and see what you got, Carl.
Cool. Let me. Here we go. You guys have it?
Yep.
Cool. Let me play. All right. If you have any, ask away, Justin.
Yeah. So when you get this scene or something like this, I guess when you go ahead after like the work's all done and you're like, all right, I want to make something. What would you say balance wise in this scene is your work and like Dekogon work, or like work that you've grabbed from the marketplace?
Yeah. So for this one was awesome. I watched a movie called Summer of '84, which was
That's a good one.
Really cool. Really good movie. Good horror movie. Good suspense movie for anybody. And growing up in that era, I was just like, man, I really want to build something based around this. And Dekogon had released like a couple of packs about 80s content that were phenomenal. And there were a couple other folks, some guys named the White Noise Team, Pixel Cloud, and Alex Phantom were some other folks. So all of the props in this scene were those guys. And then the only thing I had to worry about was like window frames and architecture and things like that. So the super bare bones, simple things. And then just grabbing some 80s posters and things like that and throwing it onto existing art. And so from there, it was just, okay, well, I know I want to build a room. I want to sell the simple aesthetic. So just a couple simple sketches to understand, what the shape of the room would be and kind of the rough, loose layout. It was like the worst kind of sketch I've ever made. I would never show it to anyone, but it was enough for me to start, putting the assets into the scene and getting an idea for where everything would go and the density of content.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're coming at it from the side of like, hey, I'm going to create the structure, and you have a lot of help from actual prop content, that does give you a lot more creative freedom to literally focus on set dressing, telling the story, and lighting, and all the like the little bells and whistles, like these animations you have, and like the animated flat, like just sorry, the fan and everything. Because the one thing I'm really drawn to, we'll share links to Clinton and Carl's work as well. But the one thing I'm really drawn to is just the amount of set dressing and how good it is at telling a story. And I feel like that's something that, you know, even all students and all professionals, it's like you need to be able to, we're constantly talking about tell a story. And without telling a story and just looking at the scene, I know I can picture in my head the kind of person who's living in this room right now. And I feel like I mean, just I guess like to rephrase it, does having all these assets not as something you have to worry about modeling give you that extra time to really experiment and play around with set dressing, lighting, and all other content?
Yeah, it absolutely does. You know, in a lot of cases, some of the assets will inspire a story in your mind. You know, you can start to see like the Walkman, and you can start to think about, you know, where this person was the last time they used it. They came in after working out or running, and they set it down on this table, and they let it hang over the edge, and maybe they knocked the phone over too, and it's the whole place is just a mess. So sometimes the assets can inspire that as well. You know, you have the movie or film or whatever you're referencing, but sometimes the availability of the content can allow you to tell a story too, which is kind of cool. If you're doing level art, you know, it's different in the industry. Some studios, you know, environment artists build props and decorate levels. At Gearbox, we have content artists who build props, and then level artists who then take those assets and decorate those scenes. So when you're building, you know, repetitious environments and you're utilizing the same assets, you have to get creative and kind of let those assets determine the stories you want to tell sometimes.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's very, I love seeing this stuff. It's this the little details. And Clinton, when you see someone reusing your content like this, does it give you ideas of like possibly new scenes that you want to create for yourself? Because I know you actually talked about like beyond the off detective's office, like you're talking about wanting to do more environment type scenes too.
Definitely. Whether Carl realizes it or not, he has influenced me massively as to what what we should generate next. Because every time I see how he uses our assets, I think, oh, okay, that's interesting. So he used it in this way. How could we like generate more content as to like how he's approaching his like use of our particular work? So it is super useful to actually see that, so that we better understand like the process. It's like an insight for us as a provider to like Carl as like the buyer to be like, oh, how is the buyer using our content? And it's like I can directly see that and be like, oh, I now have a better insight as to like what kind of like content we can produce that would best suit his needs. So yeah, I would definitely say the buyers in general always influence us. And also like honestly, we get like tons of emails of people just email us to be like, hey, I've looked on the Unreal Marketplace and I love you guys' work, but I can't find blah, blah, blah. Are you guys planning on making that? And I'd be like, we weren't, but maybe we will now. So I'll start like researching a little bit into that. And that definitely helps us too as well. So like even just suggestions are just really useful.
Very cool. Yeah, so I'm gonna I love hearing that kind of stuff too. And then let's go back to this previous slide. Whoops. And I think that's what you're just kind of talking about here, what to keep in mind when creating your assets. So I think a big thing what you're kind of talking about, Clinton, is keeping tabs of, I guess, what people are actually making on these different communities like ArtStation, like the Rookies, like any of those, and seeing how people are actually using it. Because if you pay attention to what people are creating, and you hit it right in the head when I was asking you before, like what determines what kind of packs you want to make, just you have to have your finger on the pulse as an artist and creative of what pop culture is. Like obviously if like you're following that trend, you kind of have to be right on that, which means that, you know, you're going to be creating content that someone who just got done binge watching like Stranger Things or Mindhunter is going to be like, okay, I want to create this scene. And cool, you got your tools to help you. And then being able to look at what people like Carl are creating. Because I think, you know, seeing what the reason why I love seeing what people like Carl create, because I feel like it's oftentimes, and Carl, you hit it right in the head too, when you're in development, it can be 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years of the same art style, same content, which could be great. You get to a studio, you plug in, you know your role, but oftentimes it's like, you never know what you're going to have this great idea just driven from like being able to have the time on the side to create it. Like, look at Dead Space was a great example of all these developers at EA who were just always working on these T for teen games, and they always wanted to make a sci-fi horror game, and then they actually made one, but they had to carve the time out on their own to develop these amazing scenes. But and it seems like what Unreal Marketplace does is it really speeds up the process of being able to create your ideas and showcase them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's useful no matter how long you were in the industry. There may be a lot of people watching that are starting their journey now, but I mean, I've been doing this, with modding and stuff for 20 years, and so finding something that still gets me excited is super, super valuable. And finding that thread, there's always something, just the way you feel now when you're learning, never let that change. Let new nerdy technical features, when you see like 427 features pop up and we're all digging through the change notes, don't ever forget that. And so projects like this can be very freeing and rewarding. When you get done, you have something to show for your time. So even if you've been in a isolation for 5 years working on the next big game, you still have stuff that represents what you're capable of doing, that you can share with friends and family and other artists.
Yeah, and it's fun, man. Even just working with you guys on the side, like I geek out when I'm like, oh man, look what we just did. It's awesome. So let's talk about like, and you kind of talked about creating content can bridge your work and experience, which is basically what you just said, Carl. It's like, hey, sometimes you're working on projects that you actually can't share, and you're like, but I'm actually doing things, and then it's like you want to be able to work on the outside of, and maybe you're juggling like a personal life or anything else, and you do have the ability to still create these ideas and have things helping you. And then being a regular artist versus sharing work on the marketplace and the usability of assets. So I guess that's a good question. Clinton, you talked about this earlier about how actually creating the content for the Unreal Marketplace allowed you to not only get new friends like Carl and myself, but also it led to more opportunities with contract jobs and to the formation of Dekogon Studios. So yeah, I think that's a very valid point, because when we think about selling content, we're like, all right, how can I do this? How can I make a quick buck? What is the benefit to me? And it seems like just by talking with you guys today so far, the benefits are not just the profit that you make from that asset selling. It's all the doors that it opens up that you may not even be aware of networking wise. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think like there's something to it. Like Carl said, it's like sometimes you're doing something every day to day, and then you get to a point where you're like, I'd really like to do something completely different today, and that's unrelated to this. And I think like for me, like the mansion was that, where I worked on it for like a couple years in the background, just like, whenever I wanted to do something different or like try some weird art technique that I'd been thinking about. And that allowed me to then after all of those years of culmination of just random art techniques that I was trying to see what work and like do different blend materials or whatever, I was like, oh, cool. Now I'm going to list this and I'm going to make back money from all the time I also invested in this, not only learning, but also now I'm going to get a reward after this. So it's really kind of cool to have both sides of the win for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something I kind of talk about when I'm mentoring students too. And I'm sure you do as well, is experimenting with ideas and just creating content. And I feel like when you do get into a studio, you really don't have much time, depending on how long the studio's production is and where you are in the development cycle. You don't have much time to practice and play with ideas. Sometimes you're just creating content. So I think stuff like this does allow you the ability to kind of try different methods of development, watch a couple of tutorials, try to create something. Then I'm trying to recreate a scene based on a game I like or a movie I like, just something that not only makes you feel proud, but it's also to showcase all right, cool. I do feel validated in my job. Because sometimes when you're just not especially me and Carl have talked about times, when you get up in production and you're doing less production, you're doing more meetings, it's like, oh man. So we just want to be able to create these things, not only to showcase ideas, but to just make sure we feel validated. But so here's a good question too. So the one on here that says being a regular artist versus sharing work on the marketplace and usability assets. I think when we talk about being a regular artist, people probably talk about I think there's a nice kind of balance that can be struck where you're able to create content, like you said, Clinton, and you can do it for yourself or your portfolio. I think your office is a great example, but then you can take that exact same thing and you can make sure you can share it for the marketplace. Now, this specific talk today is high level, and in the next talk, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of like the technical and the financial aspects. But obviously, when you're creating content for yourself, most times people are not creating content that is going to be thought of like, hey, who's going to use this? Like, what studio is going to use this? What we're going to do is when people are creating content, they are just kind of like blinders on. All right, this will look good, but when the minute that you have to make work that's actually used in the marketplace, you have to make it so it's broken down, so it's like optimized the right way so it can actually be functional. And do you think that there is a really strong benefit to being a regular artist that actually takes the work and preps and sells it? Because it sounds like it should be no contest. It's like, hey, if you're making this stuff, just take 2 extra steps, make sure it's all packaged correctly, optimized, and name it right, and then just go sell it. You know what I mean?
Definitely, yeah. Like I mean, I think it's like a huge part of it, which I think like when you're as an artist, like your first focus, obviously, as you're trying to get into a job, is like, oh, I want to be a good artist. I just want to make good art. Like that's your main focus. But then what you quickly realize when you get in the industry is like accountability is the next most biggest important thing. And a lot of artists don't have that going in. And so making a scene like this makes you extremely accountable. Because if I like make an asset and I put the pivot like way out in the middle of nowhere and Carl goes to place that asset, he's gonna be like, I hate this creator because they made this terrible asset, you know? And so it's like, it just makes you accountable for like, oh, did I create collisions correctly? Did I create light maps properly? Did I make a material that actually is performant? Like, or am I just like blowing through budget as to like, you know, performance? Like, am I actually being aware of those kind of things? Like, how does this look from multiple angles if like a character were to explore the space? And so all those kind of things make you kind of quickly think like, I'm making art, but I'm also making art that's usable to not only like a developer, but also like to the end goal, which is like the product that's going to be shipped in. So I think those kind of things work hand in hand to not make you just an artist, but it makes you a commercial artist, which makes you a more sellable commodity, you know, for your career moving forward as well too.
Yeah, it's like what Carl said too. When you are actually using content, if you're buying it and you're using it and you're seeing like it actually is like made correctly, for you as a developer, you're like, man, this not only is this a really well, like the art looks great, it's actually functional. I can bring it in, it's easy to use. There was no bugs in it.
Right.
I would imagine as like being a developer, you're like, there's an open position. Let's just hire this person because we've already tried to work out.
Yeah. And one thing I've seen a lot recently, you know, it's a lot of times people will make kind of a portfolio piece, you know, and they'll kind of double down. They'll release that as well. But a lot of times it's very custom content, you know, not very modular. And while the scene is beautiful, and it's really neat for people to kind of get in there and take it apart and look at it, it doesn't consider all of those things that Clinton was just talking about, the usability of it. It's kind of like, yeah, I built the scene. Here you go. You can look at it. That would be cool if it were like $4.99, but a lot of times it's like, this is $99.99, baby. I spent a lot of time on this scene, you know? And so I think sometimes when creators are creating these packs, they all should be considering that, you know, the more utility and thought is put into the end user, the more valuable the content is. Whereas if you're making a scene that can recreate that scene, not as much, right?
Yeah. All right. So I think we're at the point where we can just start shooting out some Q&As. So you already answered this, how you get inspiration for asset package themes. It's just basically by like, seems like doing your research on what is actually missing, but also what is relevant, like pop culture wise, whether like, hey, you know, Life is Strange is selling really well and Stranger Things is doing well. So let's make some 80s themed stuff. Or so basically that seems like the question for that. What kind of assets, I guess, sell the best for you, Clinton? Is it prop packages or environments?
I would say it's kind of a blend. I think like for prop packages, I would say like obviously the big highlights are like our medieval pack, military and hospital. I think because that's like such a commonly used thing among like multiple games and trends. Right. But I also think a lot of our environments sell extremely well because we have so many like talented people like Carl and, you know, like other people we work that just like add a lot to the quality of the content that somebody's like, how are they able to reach that and make it still performant? So they want to download it, buy it, see how like break it apart and understand like, oh, how is it lit? Like, how are the materials made? Like, how are the pieces constructed? And so it better informs them to actually how to create a full scene. And so I think that's why we get a lot of like purchases, not only from props themselves, but also the full environments as too.
Let's kind of run through, because we have a couple in the question and answer one too, but I am kind of curious about this one when it says how much time per week can I expect to put into running the marketplace business? I guess even beyond that, like, I guess, because that seems like a high level one. Can we also talk about maybe how long do you spend on creating an actual asset package?
Yeah, I think it really just depends on like, the complexity of the package itself. Like, that's the greatest thing about the marketplace, is that there is no set like limit as to like how like large or small a package can be. Like, there is a minimum amount of content that has to be in there. So I think it's like maybe 8 or 10 props, but I think in general, like, you can pretty much make it as big or expansive or as small as you want, and then sell it accordingly with whatever price tag is related to that. So it really just depends on like how much time you want to invest in it. And so if you want to start out, like, I know a lot of people like Warren Marshall, like he started out with like a few marketplace packs that had just maybe like 10 or 12 things in it, but they were all super useful stuff and they were like very contained, and he just released a bunch of these like mini packs. And so that was really useful for him because he didn't have to spend like a massive amount of time on it. And he could also quickly be like, okay, I've made this one, I'm going to ship it off, I'm going to work on something else, freelance, do something else for a while, and I'll come back to it when I have free time again. And so it's pretty easy once you've kind of like initially sent the pack out, because it kind of just like runs itself as to like, just making sure that you're doing any kind of Q&A otherwise. But like, for the most part, once it's launched, it's pretty much just like as is on the marketplace.
Do you, and then I'm going to jump into the question and answers over here. Do you still get sales from like the office that you first posted?
Oh yeah, we get sales from like, I thought for a long time, I was like, oh, I'll just start like slowly ramping things down that don't sell anymore. But every time we check, I'm like, we're still getting sales from stuff that was like on there since day one. So I think it's a matter of like the content, right? Like, is the content good enough to hold up to now? That if the answer is yes, then like people will still buy it. So if you make something that's like really kind of shoddy and it's going to like date really fast, then it's like, obviously that's going to have much more fall off compared to something that you put a lot of effort and energy to make sure it's going to last as long as it can.
All right, so let's look at some of these questions. The ideas start on paper, mood board. What is the process at the beginning? So Sebastian's asking, like, how do you get your ideas, I guess, when you're creating content? And paper, mood board, I guess. So I'm assuming the process that you have when you guys are starting your ideas. Carl, you kind of mentioned yours, where you just had your initial sketch. You're like, hey, I know what I want to make, and then you go over to the marketplace and you kind of pick things out. But I'm assuming the same thing goes for you, Clinton. It's kind of like you have your idea and you just list and kind of sketch out, and just, what do you do? Just grab a bunch of photo reference, or?
Yeah, a lot of photo reference. So like a lot of like things, most of our packs are based on real world scenarios. So it's like a lot of references from real world, like objects, like material types, things like that. And then like we use like Pinterest and Trello. It's probably two of our major tools.
But yeah, I love that stuff. Yeah, bottom line, use reference, everyone. So now that Unreal 5 engine is available, do you plan on releasing more content for that in upcoming months as well? And how do you determine what engine and versions are the best assets you should be able to sell for? So I guess you're saying, Unreal 5 is out next year, right? We got the beta thing. So how are you going to scale that content?
Yeah, so I think almost all of our packs, especially the more popular ones, are definitely going to move forward to Unreal. We've already done like some tests to like see how well it transfers over, and so far no issue at all on our end. And then we'll definitely be developing more stuff as we kind of go towards like some of the special features like nanite and stuff like that, to kind of have packs that are more specific to those kind of like new things in Unreal 5.
All right, so when you're making assets, do you also make textures in Substance Designer and Painter, or you just hand paint them in Painter? Do you sell material packs too? So let's put this one down. All right, what are you using the texture, and do you sell the materials as well by themselves?
Sure. So we have done, like I said, like most of Dekogon is formed of like different artists, cumulative skills working on different packs. So we have done a few special edition packs where we've done like work with designer artists that we really wanted to work with. We've also done packs where, we've had people do specific kind of like texture-based stuff. But for the most part, most of our packs are done, at the artist's discretion. So whether they're using Painter, Designer, or whatever other means, it's typically like, whatever the artist prefers, as long as it stays within consistency as to the rest of the pack, as to like the art quality. And that's something like we as Dekogon like basically make sure that, you know, everything coming together in the end has a consistency between it. So it, you know, when it ships out, it doesn't feel like this thing was made by someone completely different than this thing.
Yeah. But I think honestly, that is the kind of thing that's nice about like using Substance Painter, Designer, even like anything that Quixel's doing, is that it has that kind of like baseline. And especially when you guys are doing anything for Unreal Marketplace, for example, it still gets pushed out to like an FBX and a target pack. So it's like same. So you could technically use Blender to make something and someone else.
Definitely.
Maya. Very cool. So we answered that one. What do I do to get more visibility in Marketplace? I already sell there, but I get more attention when my product becomes showcased than other. So I guess the question is like, how do you get like what would you say is a good tip to get your work more noticed in Marketplace?
Definitely, yeah. So I would say some big suggestions would be post on a lot of Discord groups. Like if you're like on a lot of like 3D Discord groups, that's a really one. A lot of like, I know a lot of people post on like a lot of Facebook groups that are like, you know, like 1,000 hours or 100,000 hours or whatever. And like they'll post on there and a bunch of other places that they're part of. I would say like anywhere you can basically share your content, whether it be like Instagram or like any kind of other platform like that, LinkedIn, showing like, hey, here's my content that I've created. And share it not only as like a content pack, but also like as art that you've made. So it's like, it's showcasing like art. And oftentimes like I'll even do this myself where I'm like scrolling through ArtStation and I'll be like, oh, someone made this really cool like thing. And I'll be like, oh, actually there's a link for it in the description as to like the Marketplace pack. And I'll click on that and then I'll like just buy it. I'll be like, oh, I just want to check this out and see what it looks like. So it's like, that's an easy way to get like people like me that are just want to see cool art to be like, oh, I just want to see how they went about doing this. And it's like a quick sell.
Plus I feel like, you know, if I'm speaking from my standpoint, I don't know if it's for Carl's too, you know, once I see brand recognition, which is Dekogon, and you have that simple website attached to it, I feel like there's this sense of comfort for me. Like brand recognition's like, all right, I know it's going to be good. I know that there's an actual website I can go to. I know that there's a contact form I can do if I'm having issues. Like I know that that's there. So that might be another way to kind of get your stuff more visible in marketplaces, just to create content, but also have that brand recognition.
Definitely.
Yeah, and take it very seriously. You know, make sure that you are. A lot of people there are a couple creators that they put together incredible media packs, but then when you actually get the content, it's not quite, you know, what it looked like. So try to be as honest and earnest as you can about the shots you're taking and the content that you're providing people. You never want someone to get that buyer's remorse on the marketplace, because that can damage your brand big time for the long haul by putting something there that isn't, you know. ArtStation's a great place for really fantastical screenshots, and we can kind of fake and dodge and make things look a little better. But for the marketplace, you definitely want to make sure that what I'm buying is what you're, you know, is what you're selling.
So we'll answer one more, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Zoe. So the last one, Glenn asks, is does your asset go through a vetting process before it is put on the marketplace? It's a good question.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a whole breakdown on the Epic Games website as to like, oh, here's all the rules for marketplace, naming conventions, general like guidelines to follow about like collision, light maps, all that kind of stuff. And then also when you submit your assets, you actually submit it through like a verification process. So like somebody at Epic will take a look at the pack, make sure it follows all those rules, and then approve it, or they'll send it back with like, oh, here's 12 things that we found on your pack that need to be fixed before we can kind of move forward on that. And so it's every interaction I've ever had through that experience has been really good. Like they always are very thorough. They're really quick to give feedback. And so like, it's been a really good process going back and forth with them for sure.
Very cool. Yeah. So those of you to get your questions answered, like we're going to kind of pop back in and do some more. There's still a lot of there, which is good. We're going to have another QA session next time as well. But I wanted to kind of hand this back over to Zoe as we finish it up. I'll click the slides.
Thanks. So thanks so much, you guys. That was so informative and such great questions in the Q&A. Like Justin said, we'll be back next week, and we'll try to answer a few of the extra questions that we haven't had time to get to. But thanks so much, everyone, for asking such great questions. So I want to tell you a little bit about our 3D modeling courses at CG Spectrum. So if you're feeling inspired at all by all of these incredible scenes that we've been looking at and these assets, you can study 3D modeling with us, and you can even learn 3D modeling with Clinton as your mentor, which is amazing. The courses we offer in 3D modeling range from 3D basics to advanced sculpting. And the course includes all the software licenses you'll need. So in this case, that would be ZBrush, Maya, Houdini, and Substance Painter. You get a live Q&A with your mentor every week, which is amazing. So picture this, but just a lot smaller scale, just with Clinton, for example. And plus we have a dedicated career development manager, Maxine, who will give you additional support to get you in front of employers, which is an incredible resource that we offer as well to all of our students. The advanced 3D modeling diploma is 9 months. Clinton has limited spots, but if you apply by June 25th, you can start already in July. And next week, I'll send in the chat here, I'm sending a link to our 3D modeling courses, as well as an expression of interest page for our upcoming real-time virtual production course, which will be starting this fall. So click there and put your email in, and we will be sending you more information about that when we are going live with it. And next week, don't forget to join us for part 2 of this webinar series. So we'll be back here, same place, same time, next Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to be going over some of the more useful practical tips about selling on Marketplace, like how to package, price, and license your assets like a pro, proper formatting for the marketplace, how to value yourself as an artist and build a rapport with your audience, which touched on a little bit today, technical requirements for submitting, plus a lot more. And the registration link is in the chat right now. So just click there, scroll on down to register for part 2. And we hope you've enjoyed this session today. If your question wasn't answered today, we'll try to get to it next week. And if you have any other questions or comments, or if you'd like to know more about our courses, or just drop us a line, please visit us at cgspectrum.com or email us at hello@cgspectrum.com. And I recommend that you guys check out our website. We have a ton of really great free resources available. And while you're there, you can take a peek at our modeling courses if you want more info about them there. So thanks so much to everyone who tuned in today. We'll be emailing a recording of the session to the email address that you registered with in about 24 hours. And it will also be available on our resources page on our website. Thanks so much to Justin, Clinton, and Carl for sharing all of this incredible, great, useful information. And good luck to everybody who's going to start out selling your assets on the Unreal Marketplace. And we will see you here next week for part 2. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone. See you next week.